Hey guys! Tonight we saddle up for a long, slow ride across the endless grasslands of Mongolia. Picture this: you're wrapped in a thick, scratchy woolen deal, basically a medieval Mongol bathrobe meets cloak hybrid, while the wind whistles against your cheeks and your pony trudges under the open sky. The horizon is so flat, so uninterrupted, it starts to feel like you've been riding into forever. But hey, at least you're warm. And by warm, I mean swaddled like a ship-shaped burrito in layers of dense, lanolin heavy wool. You probably won't survive this, no offense. The climate is brutal, the food is, let's call it functional, and if you drop your only flint to start a fire, well, let's just say the wolves on this steppe aren't SHY. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while we're still mostly awake, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this sleepy little caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive on the steppe just before dawn. The air smells of dry grass, last night's embers, and sheep, lots of sheep. Your guide, a stout man with a weathered face and a beard that's doing its own thing, hands you a bowl of fermented mare's milk and gestures toward a nearby herd. They're mostly shaggy, mostly irritable, and completely essential. In Mongol life, sheep were more than just livestock. They were the clothing rack, the pantry, the trade reserve, the heating system, and occasionally, dinner. But it was their wool, the dense, oily, resilient kind, that truly built this empire. Historians still argue whether the Mongol expansion would have worked without their deep knowledge of animal husbandry. Especially sheep. Sure, they had horses, and bows, and frighteningly good logistics. But without wool, you'd freeze before you ever reached your next conquest. Wool wasn't just warm, it was life insurance. Wool had unique properties that made it ideal for life on the steppe. It retained heat even when wet. It resisted flames, handy when you sleep next to an open fire. It could be pressed into felt, thick, pliable fabric that could insulate a yurt or wrap a newborn or pad a saddle. It even absorbed body oils and, yes, smells, creating a kind of lift-in aroma that may or may not have frightened invaders. And that woolly cloak you're wearing? It might be years old. No one's quite sure. It's been passed down, patched, and repurposed. Mongols didn't waste a single fiber. When wool started to wear out, it became rug backing, saddle lining, or insulation stuffing. Even lint had a job. Now, you took your hood tighter as a sudden gust sweeps across the plain. Your boots, also felted wool, with leather soles, sink slightly into the frost-hardened earth. The cold seeps into everything here. Without layers of thick wool, you'd be a statue by noon. Meanwhile, your horse munches quietly nearby. Even it has a felt saddle pad, stitched from layered wool. It keeps the saddle from chafing and keeps the horse from cursing your name, if horses did that. Interestingly, the Mongols didn't spin wool into thread in the way European cultures did. Instead, they pounded it into submission. Felting involved beating, soaking, rolling, and pressing wool until it meshed into a single, durable mat. It was loud, smelly, and probably great for your triceps. But the result? Magic. Thick felt panels for the walls of your yurt, cloaks that shed rain, and blankets that could stop wind dead in its tracks. Some French scholars even argued that the felt-wrapped yurts helped Mongols sleep more deeply and regularly than their stone house-dwelling foes. Sound insulation, thermal comfort, and a space free from drafty corners. Imagine that on your next camping trip. As the sun peeks over the hills, you see other yurts dotted in the distance, clusters of nomadic families moving slowly across the terrain. Smoke curls from their stovepipes. A dog barks, then thinks better of it. Somewhere, someone is combing a sheep with a tool that looks like a medieval salad fork. You wander over and give it a try. The sheep glares at you. It knows you're new. Still, you manage to coax a few tufts of wool free, which feel oddly greasy, thanks to the lanolin. Turns out, that natural oil makes the wool water resistant. Also, it's great for your hands. Early Mongol women used Ixos lanolin as skin balm. And honestly, you should try it. Beats whatever's in your nightstand drawer. And speaking of women, they were the backbone of Mongol wool economy. While men herded and fought and drank fermented milk in heroic quantities, women processed the fleece. They cleaned it, beat it, shaped it, and turned it into everything from baby blankets to diplomatic gifts. Wool work was generational, mothers taught daughters. And each family had unique methods and patterns. Some of these woolen goods were considered so personal, so sacred, they were never traded or sold. A bride might bring her own felt saddle blanket into marriage as a symbol of her worth and heritage. A shaman might wear a specially knotted wool cord to signify a dream vision. So here you are, wrapped in a Mongol cloak, greasy-handed, slightly chilled, and completely surrounded by wool in every imaginable form. Gold, sure, the Mongols plundered it, but on a freezing night with a howling wind and no trees for shelter. A bar of gold won't do you much good. A felt robe, on the other hand, that's worth more than a king's ransom. You glance down. A clump of sheep fluff clings to your boot. It probably belongs to history now. You're still on the steppe. The sun just beginning its lazy climb over the horizon. And already, the cold as teeth. Not that you're complaining, you've got your wool. But as the chill nibbles at your nose, you finally spot your home for the night, a round, white yurt, like a frosted cupcake dropped in the middle of an open plain. A Mongol yurt isn't just a tent. It's a marvel of survival engineering. They called it a her. And it was the kind of dwelling that understood the assignment, portable, warm, durable, and absurdly cozy if you didn't mind the smell of sheep and old firewood. While stone castles in Europe crumbled under frost and took decades to build, Mongols had figured out how to pop up a livable, wind-resistant shelter in under an hour. You duck your head and step inside. Immediately, you're wrapped in warm, not the sharp sting of fire but the soft insulation of thick felt. The floor is lined with carpets. The walls, curved like the inside of a teacup, are covered in patterned felt panels. There's no sharp corner for the wind to howl against. No cold stone to soak the heat from your bones. The central stove puffs a lazy line of smoke through a hole at the top. Right under the crown wheel, a circular wooden skylight held in place by bent poles like the ribs of a great beast. It's open now, letting in light and a bit of breathy air. But it'll be covered by felt flaps once the evening wind kicks up. The structure is built on principle, but also vibes. You don't just plop the door anywhere. It faces south, always. That way, the family knows which side is sunrise, which side is cold, and most importantly, which side the gods might be watching from. You sit to the west, near the Place of Honor. Try not to mess that up. Mongol etiquette has unspoken rules. And violating them, like stepping on the threshold, could earn you a glare colder than the outside wind. Now, let's talk furniture, or the lack thereof. The floor is your couch. The rocks are your chairs. The stove is your center of gravity. A few chests line the walls, painted with cheerful red or blue swirls, holding everything from tea bricks to ancestral relics. Overhead, ropes hold meat to dry in the smoke, while bundles of wool hang like sleepy clouds. And right there, in the corner, a child's toy goat made from, you guessed it, felt. Historians still debate whether this minimalistic style was born of necessity or preference. But once you live in a yurt, you stop missing doors that crack and walls that echo. Everything in here pulls its weight. Even the felt cover isn't just insulation, it can be folded, tied, repaired, or packed in mere minutes. Mongol homes didn't gather dust, they galloped. Now, imagine a castle wall, cold stone, immovable, sometimes moldy, and don't get us started on the draft. No wonder the Mongols laughed when they first saw fortified cities. Why trap yourself behind rock when you can follow your herd and carry your house on a cart? Of course, not all yurts were created equal. The Khans and noble families had deluxe models, double-walled felt, layered carpets, hand-painted latiche work. Some even had portable shrines and altars. And then there were the hertereg, giant yurts mounted on carts drawn by oxen. Think of them as the world's first mobile mansions. They didn't move fast, but they didn't have to. The world came to them. You settle down beside the stove, where a bubbling pot releases the scent of boiling mutton and salt. Your host, with a grin that's part pride, part sheep fat confidence, ladles you a portion and tears some flatbread with weathered fingers. There's no rush. Meals here aren't rushed. Outside, a breeze toys with the flap of the yurt. But inside, all is still. And here's the weird bit, despite the drafty edges and wool-smelling walls, you feel safe, as if these woolen layers and the smoky breath have formed a cocoon. Some researchers suggest the circular shape of the yurt actually helps reduce stress, no corners to hide in. No blind spots. Just one flowing, symmetrical space. Like living in a hog. If that hog came with boiled meat and fermented milk. Quirky fact. Mongol yurts had a surprising sense of symmetry and gendered space. Men's tools and hunting gear were kept on the western side. Women's tools and kitchen goods on the east. The north wall, directly opposite the door, was the sacred area. Family heirlooms. Shamanic items. Sometimes a miniature altar. Even guests had their assigned sitting zones. Cross those invisible lines, and you risk mild chaos, or at least a politely stern correction. So, while other civilizations bragged about marble pillars and golden archways, the Mongols had already figured out what really mattered: warmth, efficiency, and a structure that could survive both a snowstorm and a dinner party with in-laws. As the sun climbs higher, your host rolls up part of the felt covering to let in more light. Outside, you can see the herd grazing. The younger boys on ponies rounding them up. One man fiddles with a saddle. Another woman pats down a newly pressed felt panel on a wooden frame. Everyone knows their role, their rhythm. The yurt isn't just a house, it's a node in a living system. And when it's time to move, the whole thing collapses like a pop-up dream. In a few hours, it'll be strapped to carts. The animals rounded, and the landscape returned to silence. But for now, you sit, surrounded by the soft curve of felt and wood. You sip your tea, maybe pick a bit of wool from your sleeve. The gold of kings? It might buy you a throne. But out here, on the lonely sea of grass, it won't keep you alive till morning. Wool will. You're getting used to the itch now. The wool robe scratches you in places you didn't know had nerve endings. But somehow, it feels right, like your body's starting to understand the language of the steppe. No frills. Slightly abrasive, and built to last. Which brings us to the obvious question: why not wear silk? Why not drape yourself in furs or those lovely imported linens from somewhere much warmer and more pampered? You'd look fantastic, no doubt, but you'd also freeze to death. Twist an ankle in impractical slippers. And probably spend most of your day trying to scrub grass stains out of a garment that cost more than your entire hair. Gold, silk, and fine furs had their place. Of course, the Mongols admired the beauty of those things. Especially when they conquered cities full of them. But when it came to day-to-day living, to trudging across the plains with your entire life tied to the back of a horse, it wasn't even close. Wool won. Every time. Why? Let's talk comfort, and by comfort, I mean survival. Wool isn't just warm. It breathes. It traps pockets of air between its fibers, keeping you insulated from both cold and heat. It wicks moisture away, keeping your skin dry even when you're sweating under 4 layers. And in case you were wondering, it's also naturally flame resistant. That means if your sleeve brushes against your cooking fire, you'll probably just smell like barbecue, not become the barbecue. Historians still debate how much imported fabric actually influenced Mongol fashion. Some sources claim noble families indulged in Chinese silks, while others argue that such fabrics were reserved for ceremony, not daily wear. But no one doubts that wool was the workhorse of the wardrobe. There's also the little matter of undergarments. Or rather, the lack thereof. Underneath that robe, it's just you, the wind, and maybe a felt sash for moral support. Wearing silk undergarments in the steppe would be like bringing a feather boa to a blizzard. Fancy, but foolish. Instead, wool-lined trousers, sometimes stuffed with raw fleece, were the Mongol version of long johns. They sagged, they smelled, they worked. You're walking now, the yurt behind you and the herd spread out in a lazy arc. A young herder waves at you from atop a small, fussy pony. He's wearing a thick hat with flaps that hang like sleepy wings over his ears. The outer robe, fastened with a white sash, is made of heavy, quilted wool. Its color somewhere between earth and smoke. It looks warm. You, on the other hand, are beginning to suspect your cloak as a small family of grasshoppers living in it. But the trick isn't just in the material, it's in the layering. Mongol clothing worked like an onion. First, a light wool underlayer to wick sweat. Then a heavier robe for insulation. Then, if you were traveling or expecting a snowstorm, a thick outer felt cloak that basically turned you into a walking mattress. Add a hat, mittens, and boots made of hide and wool, and you were ready to face a wind that could peel the paint of your dreams. Still, it wasn't all burlap and grit. There was fashion, too. Colors mattered. Patterns told stories. Some wool robes were dyed with bright reds or deep blues using natural pigments. While stitching along the hems could reveal tribal affiliations or social rank. Even the shape of your collar could whisper secrets about who you were and where you belonged. And don't forget the buttons, or lack thereof. Most Mongol garments closed with these sashes, or clever folds. Buttons were a liability on the move, they popped off. Got lost in the grass. Or froze in winter. A well-wrapped deal, on the other hand, hugged the body like a loyal sheepdog. Want a quirky detail? Some Mongol robes had slits under the arms, not just for ventilation, but to allow archers to shoot while riding without their sleeves getting in the way. Imagine designing your wardrobe around horseback archery. Suddenly your zip-up hoodie feels underachieving. As you reach a ridge overlooking a broad river valley, the wind picks up, and you're grateful once again for that itchy, scratchy, stubborn cloak. Somewhere in your mind, a modern part of you is still holding out for a hoodie. But another part, the one that smells like lanolin and salt, understands. Wool isn't soft, it's loyal. The Mongols even treated their wool garments like long-term investments. When a robe wore thin in the elbows or knees, it wasn't discarded. It was patched, often with contrasting fabric that added a pop of color and told a story of where you'd been, what you'd endured. Your cloak became a scrapbook. Historians have found Mongol burial mounds where woolen clothes were laid to rest with their owners, carefully folded or even burnt in effigy. Gold was rarely included, not because it wasn't valuable, but because the deceased wouldn't need coins in the afterlife. They'd need warmth. You turn back toward the yurt. The sun now painting the sky in soft bronze streaks. Your feet crunch over frost-stiff grass, and your breath clouds the air. In your arms, you carry a bundle of raw fleece, still sticky with lanolin and smelling deeply of animal. You'll beat it clean tonight. Maybe help your host layer it into the wall, or cut a strip for repairs. Wool isn't just something you wear here. It's something you tend. Like fire or memory. A glint in the grass catches your eye. A small gold coin, maybe dropped by a trader passing through. You pick it up, rub it with your thumb. It's cold, beautiful, sure, but you pocket it absently and tighten your sash. There are more important treasures to worry about out here. You wake to the sound of hooves thudding softly in the distance. Somewhere outside, a pony snorts, a sheep bleats, and the flap of your yurt rustles in the early wind like a whisper you're not meant to understand. Your cloak, yes, still wool, is wrapped around you like a slightly judgmental hug. Today, you're heading out with a patrol. Don't worry, you're not here to conquer anything. You're just observing. But as you cinch your sash and mount your shaggy horse, your mind can't help but wander to one of the lesser-sung secrets of Mongol military genius, wool. You might think of armor as heavy metal, chainmail, and polished breastplates. But the Mongols? They had another idea. Wool armor. Not as weird as it sounds. Actually, it worked, sometimes better than iron. The standard outfit of a Mongol warrior started, as always, with layers. A thick woolen undershirt, padded wool robes, maybe some hardened leather stitched on top. And over it all, a tight-fitting felt or quilted jacket, what historians sometimes call soft armor. When properly layered, this setup could blunt arrows, absorb shock, and even reduce sword cuts. No. Really. There are accounts, some possibly exaggerated, sure, of arrows failing to penetrate these thick felt layers. The fibers, especially when compressed or quilted with horsehair or raw wool, absorbed the energy instead of letting the arrow slice clean through. You, riding now across the cold plain. Try not to test this personally. Historians still argue whether Mongol wool-based armor was universally used or simply a stopgap when metal was scarce. But what's clear is this: Mongol warriors didn't need to look like walking anvils. They needed to move fast, strike hard, and sleep in their armor if necessary. Try doing that in a full suit of mail. And here's the genius part: your armor could double as bedding. At night, that same quilted robe that absorbed a spear thrust also kept you warm. No need to pack a separate blanket. The Mongol toolkit was all about multifunctionality. If your gear couldn't ride, sleep, and fight with you, it stayed behind. You ride beside a grizzled older warrior today, his beard braided with a strip of wool cord. His bow slung across his back. His cloak is patched and some faded. But beneath it, you spot the tight grid of a padded tunic. It looks heavy, but it shifts with his movements like a second skin. When it dismounts, it throws it casually over a rock, and you realize it's lighter than you expected. The patrol pauses near a hilltop. The view stretches for miles, rolling grasslands. A few distant herds. The faint glint of a river. Your companion unrolls a felt mat, pours you both a cup of salty tea, and smiles in that way people do when they know something you don't. It tells you, slowly, how during the earlier campaigns, Mongol scouts wore wool cloaks so thick they muffled movement. Soft soles, quiet coats. Enemies mistook them for shadows until it was too late. Felt boots made no sound on stone or soil. Even the horses were blanketed in woolen pads that kept them silent and warm. French scholars have even proposed that wool was intentionally infused with natural oils or hairs, both to repel insects and to mask scent during raids. Was it true? Hard to say. But you sip your tea and try not to think about whether you smell like mutton or lavender. Another quirky trick? Woolen helmet liners. Even if a warrior had a metal cap, chances are, it was lined with tightly packed felt or layered wool. It kept the steel from freezing to the scalp. It cushioned the blow. It could be unwrapped and used as a bandage or sling. Some even had talismans, beads or knotted wool charms, sewn inside for protection. Fashion meets function, with a dash of spiritual insurance. As you ride again, your horse's hooves kicking up dry earth. The wind cuts sharper than before. You took your scarf higher. A looped strip of felt that smells faintly of last night's fire. Your boots, lined with pressed wool and hide, squish slightly from morning dew. But your toes are warm. You're starting to realize how layered protection has less to do with thickness and more to do with design. Mongol horses, too, wore their own versions of wool armor. In colder months, warriors wrapped the animals in felt capes, protecting their flanks and backs from both wind and arrows. Some of the richer nobles had horse armor decorated with dyed patterns, signaling rank or allegiance. But for the average steppe warrior, a simple felt pad and a good saddle were enough. And about those saddles, yes. Also lined with wool, sometimes stuffed, sometimes layered, always practical. They kept the rider steady, absorbed shock from long days of riding, and doubled as sleeping pillows when you were too tired to care about posture. You've never been so jealous of a saddle in your life. By midday, your group circles back toward camp. The patrol was quiet, no enemies. No excitement, but full of those tiny observations that pile up like wool fibers underfoot. The way the horses breathed steamed in unison. The way the wind caught your cloak and flared it like a battle flag. The way your wool tunic, now slightly damp, still managed to keep you warmer than anything synthetic ever could. You dismount, legs stiff but not frozen. As you stretch, your cloak slides slightly off your shoulder, and you notice a small patch, stitched in bright red thread. It wasn't there yesterday. Someone, maybe your host, sewed it on while you slept. It's a blessing, a mark of the road you've traveled. A quiet sign that, whether you know it or not, you're becoming one of them. Gold gleams in bowls, but wool rides beside you, shields you, wraps you, and says nothing. The smell hits you before anything else, smoky, earthy, and faintly sour. You're crouched near the yurt again, watching as an elderly woman thumps a dense wool mat with what looks like a carved club. She's not angry, just busy. She's making felt, and if there's one thing you've learned by now, it's that felt is a way of life. You shift your cloak and try to breathe through your sleeve. The scent is strong. This is not the fresh out of the dryer wool of modern sweaters. This is lived-in wool. Wool that has seen things. Wool that could probably tell stories if you gave it a little meat. But thing, you see, was not high on the Mongol priority list. Cleanliness existed, sure, but not in the way modern people imagine it. Soap was rare, water was precious, and scrubbing yourself bare in a freezing river while the wind tried to skin you alive? That was a good way to become a frozen cautionary tale. Historians still argue whether Mongols never bathed or just rarely bathed. Some sources, especially from Chinese scribes, portray them as dirty and smelly, which may have been cultural exaggeration. Others note a ritual cleansing with steam or smoke, and the occasional bathhouse visit, though those were far from daily spa treatments. But here's the twist: while their bodies might not have seen daily water, their clothing did a fine job of keeping them, let's say, environmentally neutral. Mongol wool cloaks and robes were worn constantly, day and night, in battle and in sleep. And over time, they would harden, not just from wear and weather, but from absorbing the natural oils of the body. What started as soft wool turned, layer by layer, into a kind of felt armor, a crusty, grimy, windproof cocoon. You feel a little queasy thinking about it. But honestly, you're also a little impressed. It gets better. That smell, it wasn't just tolerated, it was feared. Enemy soldiers reportedly described the Mongols as having a sour, greasy odor that announced them before their arrows did. Like olfactory psychological warfare. Imagine being terrified not just of the riders on the horizon, but of the stank on the wind. Quirky fact, some Mongol warriors reportedly rubbed their outer cloaks with animal fat mixed with soot. Why? It waterproofed the wool, darkened the fabric for camouflage, and added another layer of musk. If you're going into battle, might as well bring your own fog. As you sit now, sipping hot mare's milk and trying not to open your nostrils, you start to notice something odd. You've adjusted the smell, the wool, the rhythm of life, it's all blurring into something strangely cozy. Like living inside an old leather-bound book that occasionally farts. Even grooming had its own logic. Hair was often long, sometimes braided, sometimes not. Beards were trimmed with knives. And teeth? Well, let's not look too closely. Instead of perfume, people wore wool amulets infused with hairs. Small bundles tucked inside garments or stitched along the seams. These weren't just for scent, they were charms. Spells. Tokens of protection. One elderly man you pass as a pouch of dried juniper tied to his belt. When the wind kicks up, he presses it to his nose. Not because the air smells bad, but because it reminds him of home, of his wife, of something soft in a hard world. Inside the yurt, the fire smolders. You help patch a hole in the felt wall, pressing fresh wool between layers, beating it gently with a mallet, then stitching it down with thread spun from coarse hair. It's rough, but effective. Mongol repair work wasn't about looks, it was about function. If it held together through a blizzard, it passed inspection. Later, your host shows you a well-worn cloak passed down from his grandfather. It's dark gray, almost stiff, with heavy stitching across the shoulders. He points to a faded red stripe, blood. He says, from a skirmish near the Yenisei River. You nod, unsure what to say. It's not just a piece of clothing. It's a relic. In modern terms, it would be like inheriting your grandfather's hoodie, only the hoodie went to war. Was slept in for a decade. Never got washed, and once saved its owner from a spear. You begin to understand why gold wasn't really the price out here. Sure, it was nice to have. But it couldn't shield you from windburn. It didn't tell your story. It didn't remember the shape of your shoulders. Wool did. And so you sit back. The weight of your own cloak settling like a woolen exhale. Your fingers are still greasy from handling raw fleece. Your hair smells faintly of smoke. And yet, in a strange way, you feel cleaner than you have in days. Cleaner. Because the grime isn't hiding anything. It's part of the fabric now. Part of you. The woman making felt outside? She hasn't stopped. She's beating the wool with a steady rhythm, humming softly under her breath. The clouds roll above like waves. And the sheep, oblivious, keep munching. This is the kind of clean that doesn't require soap. It's the clean of continuity. Of being wrapped in something older than your name. Something that knows the wind, the land, and how to keep you breathing through both. You scratch your shoulder absently. Yep, still itchy, but also kind of sacred. You're herding now, slowly, inefficiently, and, if we're being honest, a little out of breath. Your horse trots with the same quiet judgment it's had since you first mounted, somewhere between pity and mild amusement. Ahead, a sea of sheep sways across the grassy slope like a woolen tide. It's not glamorous work, but it's the backbone of everything out here. In Mongol society, herding wasn't just a job, it was identity, inheritance, and sometimes, destiny. You took your cloak tighter and ride along a lazy arc, keeping the sheep from wandering into the ravine to your left. Your guide, a boy maybe 14 years old, whistles through his teeth and flicks a switch of dried grass. The sheep listen to him, not to you, probably because he knows what he's doing. And also probably because his robe smells more convincingly like yesterday's supper. In Mongol culture, status wasn't measured by gold jewelry or carved thrones. It was measured by livestock. A person with 1,000 sheep, 100 horses, and maybe 12 camels? That was wealth. That was power. That was someone whose yurt had the good tea and didn't run out of salted meat midwinter. Historians still debate just how much livestock an average nomadic family possessed. But estimates suggest that for a middle-tier household, several dozen sheep would be the foundation. Sheep meant wool, milk, meat, and social standing. The more you had, the more secure your lineage. And that wool wasn't just for personal use, it was currency. Tribute, dowry, and diplomatic offering. You spot a herder carrying a bundle of raw fleece over his shoulder like it's a sack of gold. And to him, it kind of is. Quirky detail, Mongol children learned to ride before they could walk steadily. And by the time they were 5 or 6, many were herding on their own. You, flopping slightly in the saddle, feel like you've missed a key developmental milestone. The kid beside you shouts something, laughs, and darts off to redirect a straying lamb. Whistles again. The horse responds. The sheep follow. It's ballet, but dustier. There's a deep-rooted rhythm to it all. Wool was a family business. The men might lead the larger herds and oversee trade. But the actual work, combing, washing, felting, stitching, was often carried out by women. Children, elders, everyone had a hand in it. And more importantly, everyone understood it. You didn't have to ask where your cloak came from. You helped grow it. During winter months, sheep were shorn more carefully, with some fleece left in patches to shield them from the cold. In spring, the wool came off in great cloudy tufts, often collected by hand or with crude wooden combs. No clippers, no electric tools, just generations of knowing how to part fleece without nicking skin or tempers. And not all wool was equal. The softest fleece, taken from younger sheep or from specific undercoat areas, was prized for clothing worn close to the skin. Coarser wool became felt, rugs, insulation. Nothing was wasted. Even the bits too small or tangled to be spun were mashed into filler. Patching oles in yurts or padding saddles. You pause beside a makeshift corral, where women are sorting fleece by touch, judging weight, softness, cleanliness. No scales, no charts, just instinct. One woman holds a particularly fluffy piece up to the sun, nods, and tosses it into a pile with a kind of reverent finality. And then there's the spiritual side of it all. Among some Mongol clans, sheep weren't just livestock, they were symbols of fertility, continuity, abundance. Some wool tufts were tied into charms or braided into horse manes before long journeys. Others were burnt in ceremonial fires. The rising smoke seen as a message to the sky spirits. You're told not to step on a stray bundle of fleece, it's bad luck. It could be watching. Yes, watching. The old woman by the fire explains that wool remembers. That it holds the shape of its wearer. That spirits, good and bad, can cling to felt like do to grass. It's one reason yurts are regularly swept, felt walls shaken, and old garments burnt instead of buried. You glance at your own cloak. It has no creases, a faint stain from last night's soup, and a smell that you're just going to stop noticing. Still, it feels personal now. You dismount to help gather strays, nudging them gently with a padded stick. Your boots crunch over dry grass and old droppings. And somewhere in the mess, you find a hand-wrapped bundle of dyed wool, maybe a child's toy. Maybe a forgotten offering. You tuck it into your belt. For later. Or maybe just because. As the herd begins to settle, you climb back onto your pony. The sun dips lower, painting everything in warm amber. Wool everywhere, on the sheep, on your clothes, on the blankets draped over a nearby cart. It's inescapable. But it's also what makes this entire world function. Gold might buy a favor. But wool built the favor. Carried it across the steppe. Wrapped it, blessed it, and fed the horse along the way. You ride back toward camp, watching your breath rise in little clouds. Ahead, smoke curls from yurts. Wool mats hang to dry. And the boy herder waves on some more before vanishing into dusk. You scratch at your sleeve. Yep, still itchy, still sacred. You're back at camp, stomach gently grumbling, fingers still carrying the tang of sheep and sun. A fire crackles low at the yurt's entrance. Surrounded by a circle of folded knees and hunched shoulders, everyone wrapped in wool. As if the whole evening is held together by yarn. Tonight, you're learning how Mongols didn't just wear wool, they lived in it. Not metaphorically, literally. The yurt you slept in last night? It's built almost entirely from felt. Floor to ceiling, wall to door flap. You watch now as two women work on a new wall panel for a family preparing to migrate further east. They spread raw wool across a giant woven mat, layer by layer, then sprinkle water across it and begin to roll it tightly with their hands and feet. One woman starts humming, the other joins. Before long, they're rolling in rhythm, singing, pressing the mat back and forth. This is how felt is made. No machines, no threads, just pressure, moisture, and time. It's like slow-cooked fabric. Or a giant wool burrito that gets flatter the more you roll it. Historians still debate whether this method of felting originated with Mongols or arrived through earlier nomadic cultures. But few would argue that the Mongols perfected the process. Felt wasn't just padding, it was infrastructure. You look around, felt rocks under your feet. Felt mats covering your walls. Felt bundles tied over saddles. Even felt curtains dividing sleeping spaces from storage. And there's more. Felt strips are braided into reins. Felt squares pad saddle sores. Felt bands wrap around newborn infants like soft armor against the cold. One elder even shows you his prized possession, a tiny felt pouch containing dried hairs. Passed down through 3 generations. The pouch, older than most houses in your hometown. Quirky fact of the night, felt was sometimes used as currency. Traders along the steppe routes accepted high-quality felt just as they would silver or livestock. It was lighter than coins, more useful than gems, and could be cut, restitched, or burnt in a pinch. It was wealth you could sleep under. You help unroll a finished panel, thick, dark, and heavy in your arms. It smells of wool, smoke, and something sweetly earthy. It'll be used to patch a wall or become a door covering. It might one day end up as part of a new yurt. Or it might, like so many before it, be passed down for years, softened by smoke and touch until it knows the shape of everyone who's lived beside it. You begin to notice the layers. Not just in the wool, but in the life it supports. A girl near the fire is curling wool strands into loops, tying them into what looks like a child's toy, a woolen sheep with tiny ears. Beside her, a man is sewing patches onto a rug, humming tunelessly while he works. The younger boys are making a game out of tossing rolled felt pokes at a target drawn in the dirt. It's the same material, everywhere, but it takes on new shapes, new meanings. Felt becomes story. You're shown an heirloom rug, its borders stitched with intricate knot patterns and symbols. It was made by the matriarch's mother, who learned from her mother. And so on. Each symbol has a tail, the diamond for the 4 winds. The zigzag for river paths. The circle for the eternal sky. When someone is born, a felt amulet is hung in the yurt. When someone dies, a strip of black felt is tied around the door. Wool doesn't just protect the body, it wraps around memory. Even play as a place. You watch as a toddler tumbles into a felt pile, laughing with the unstoppable joy only tiny humans possess. No sharp corners here, no breakable toys, just a blanket that can become a cape, a hiding place, or a throne, depending on your imagination. And then, there's the sacred side. The yurt's northern wall, the most honored direction, is decorated with felt hangings stitched with sacred symbols. Some are talismans to keep spirits away. Others invite them in. You're told, quietly, that certain felt objects shouldn't be touched unless you've been invited. Some hold prayers. Some hold ancestors. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or region-specific. What's clear, though, is that felt held symbolic weight. It wasn't just wool, it was woven belief. As night deepens and stars burn above like scattered bone beads, you're invited to lay your bedding on the floor. Your host offers you a thick felt mat, smoothed from years of use. It's heavy, oddly reassuring, like being swaddled in time. You press your head to the layered fabric and feel the give of thousands of wool strands. Pressed into solidarity. You close your eyes. There's no mattress, no pillow top, no fitted sheet, just wool and silence. You're not uncomfortable. In fact, you're more comfortable than you've been in days. It doesn't make sense, but it also does. Gold never did this for anyone. Done again. And with it, a new energy swells across the camp. You step out into the crisp morning air, breath fogging like a dragon who's just woken up from a long nap. The sheep are already murmuring. The horses are being saddled. And just beyond the edge of the yurts, a small group of riders is preparing for something that looks suspiciously like business. Trading day. Mongol society may have been nomadic, But that didn't mean it was disconnected. Far from it. Mongols were expert traders, brokers of wool, meat, livestock, and handcrafted goods. And their favorite medium? No. Not gold coins. Not rare spices. Wool. Wool, in all its forms, was a currency of movement. It could be traded as raw fleece, spun yarn, dyed felt, or even pre-crafted garments. A well-made wool cloak could earn you a horse. A roll of dense felt, maybe enough for a season's worth of millet. And the beauty of it was, if the trade didn't go through, you could always wear it home. Historians still argue about the scale of these barter networks. Some claim the Mongol Empire developed its own internal economy driven by wool-based goods. Others believe that Mongols preferred to trade raw fleece to settled neighbors who had the time and water to process it. Either way, wool was constantly in motion. Tied behind saddles, stuffed into carts, bundled in layers like the history of the people themselves. You walk alongside the traders now, careful not to step on the leading ropes. Tear-leading camels this time, odd-looking creatures draped in what appears to be ceremonial wool. Trimmed with red tassels and patches of decorative felt. Even the animals are in on the aesthetic. One of the traders, a weary woman with laugh lines and no patience for dawdling, shows you her wares, thick boots lined with lammes wool, small travel blankets tied with leather cords, and a beautifully embroidered vest stitched from dyed felt in swirling, hypnotic patterns. She points to the vest and tells you it was made by her daughter. Then she gestures to the price, 3 sheep. Or 1 horse with good teeth. You nod politely. Your teeth? Not so great. But the vest is beautiful. The market is set up with simplicity, rocks laid on the ground. Goods displayed in tidy rows. And no shouting. Negotiations here are quiet, respectful, often conducted over tea. You sit beside a group haggling over a bolt of wool cloth. The buyer fingers the whip, checks for motoles, and finally grunts. A deal is made. A felt hat is thrown in to seal the trade. Quirky detail, Mongol felt hats were more than head coverings. Their shape could indicate your clan, your region, or your marital status. Tall, cone-like hats meant you were unmarried. Short, flat-topped ones said you were spoken for. And a few hats, elaborately stitched with symbols, were reserved for spiritual practitioners, those who talked to ancestors. Or at least listened politely. You wander further, noticing that the wool trade isn't just about textiles. There are sacks of wool ready to be stuffed into saddlebags. Long braids of wool used as reins or rope. And even small balls of wool dipped in oil to be used as fire starters. Nothing is wasted. Everything has a use. You pause at one stall where a man is selling tiny felt dolls. Tear charms, little guardians for travelers. Each one stitched with a different expression. It tells you, in slow, clear words, that the red one is for safe passage. The blue one is for peaceful sleep. The green one, for lock-in marriage. You pocket a red one. You've seen the steppe. You'll take the extra help. As noon nears, the market's rhythm picks up. Wool bundles are loaded onto carts. Coins and sheep change hands. There's laughter, a little singing, and the unmistakable sound of 2 men pretending not to argue while fiercely debating the exchange rate of felt boots versus fermented mare's milk. And through it all, gold is rare. Yes, a few traders carry coins, especially those who've come from cities or caravanserais. But they're kept tucked away, used only when needed. Out here, gold is impractical, heavy, useless in a storm. It doesn't wrap around your shoulders at night or patch your tent when the wind turns mean. Felt, though, felt is the backbone of the entire trade network. You realize, watching the last camel caravan depart, that most of what's been traded today will be used immediately. No vaults, no collectors, just people moving wool around, shaping it, folding it, stitching it back into their lives. You walk back toward camp, arms full of new acquisitions, some wool mittens, a patch blanket, and, tucked carefully in your sash, a small felt pouch filled with dried hairs. Your host smiles when they see it. A good trade, they say. You nod. It feels like it. Later that night, you wrap the new blanket around your shoulders. It's heavier than your old one, with faint embroidery along the edge. You don't recognize the pattern, but your host tells you it means safe steps on uncertain roads. You run your fingers across the stitching and wonder how many hands shaped this cloth. How many hours, how many sheep, how many feet pressed it flat. You picture the woman who dyed the wool, the elder who sang while pressing it, The young trader who bartered it for salt or tea or a better bridle. Gold as a glitter that fades in darkness. But wool glows in the firelight. Stitched with stories. The wind today has opinions. It whips across the steppe like it owns the place, curling around yurts. Flipping cloak edges. And stealing half the worn right out of your boots. You hunch lower into your wool layers and wonder. Not for the first time. How anyone survived this climate without turning into a frozen meat popsicle. And then, as if summoned by your curiosity, your host appears carrying a bundle wrapped in stitched felt and tied with a leather thong. Gifts. They say simply. For the envoy. You blink. An envoy? Turns out, today you're riding with a small diplomatic party. They're delivering tribute, or maybe it's a gesture of good faith. Or maybe just a polite flex, to a neighboring clan. And the gift of choice? Wool. Lots of it. Some dyed, some stitched, some layered and pressed into tight felt panels wrapped with reverence. Mongols had a tradition of gift-giving that was as practical as it was symbolic. And wool, it was one of the most respected offerings you could give. Not because it was flashy or rare. But because it was real. Tangible. Woven effort. Something that could warm your baby or patch your tent or line your coffin. You mount your pony once again. Still sore from yesterday but slowly adapting to the idea that stirrups are your forever frenemies. The envoy group rides light and quiet. With the kind of easy grace only people born in a saddle can manage. And strapped to every saddle? Wool. Quirky fact of the ride, Mongols often transported tribute not in chests or crates. But in layered felt wraps. Bound with braided cords of wool and horsehair. The bundles looked humble, but inside could be anything from food to sacred items to delicate silk scarves. Felt wasn't just packaging, it was part of the gift. Historians still argue whether wool was chosen as tribute for its practicality or its spiritual resonance. Some believe that the layered nature of felt, pressed, beaten, shaped, mirrored Mongol values, strength through unity. Others think it was simply because wool survived the journey better than, say, a golden statue. You ride 4 hours. The grass hissing under hooves. At midday, the group stops to unpack lunch, which involves dried meat, salted cheese, and a thermos-like jug of hot tea wrapped in, you guessed it, felt. Nothing escapes it. It's the Tupperware of the steppe. The lead rider shows you one of the gifts, a square of felt embroidered with a swirling knot pattern. It looks abstract at first, but you begin to notice shapes, a pair of horses, a fire, a tree. It's not just a blanket. It's a message, a tapestry of diplomacy. When the party finally arrives at the neighboring camp, a modest cluster of yurts perched beside a stream, you notice that they've already prepared an area for the exchange. No stage, no speeches, just a clean felt rug spread on the ground and a pot of tea brewing beside a smoky fire. The two leaders meet, bowing slightly, and then the gifts are laid out with slow, deliberate care, one by one. The woolen bundles are placed like offerings to a quiet god. The felt tapestry, the boots, a child's coat, a riding pad. No one claps, no one cheers, but the tension in the air eases. Like frost melting from a blade. Your host leans over and whispers. Now they trust us to trade. Maybe share pasture, maybe not steal sheep. You nod. Seems fair. And this wasn't unique. The Mongol Empire was built not just on conquest, but on relationships, carefully managed, cautiously extended, and often wrapped in wool. Felt diplomacy, cloak and gift operations. Even the great Khans understood the power of such offerings. There are records of woolen garments, felt rugs, and embroidered saddlebags being sent to foreign courts. Not as bribes, but as statements. We live in cold lands. We made this. It will outlast your gold. One scholar even noted that during a particularly tense negotiation with a Chinese ambassador, the Mongols offered a cloak woven from wool of a specific sheep breed found only near the sacred mountain Berkhan Khaldun. The message was clear: this isn't just a gift. It's a piece of our spirit. You watch now as the two families share food, their children chasing each other around the rocks. Your host exchanges a flask of tea with the other leader, both nodding in that unspoken language of mutual benefit. No contracts, no wax seals, just warm hands and warmer felt. As the sun dips lower, the party prepares to return. You help roll up the empty felt bundles, now lighter, but still infused with the weight of what they carried. You tie one to your saddle and notice how it smells of sage and fire. A scent that says, this has traveled far. It knows what it's doing. Back at your own camp, the group is welcomed like returning heroes. Not because they won anything, but because they returned with trust. And tomorrow? There'll be trade, shared pasture, maybe even a marriage arrangement. All sparked by the quiet of a ring of wool. You lie awake that night, staring at the flickering shadows on the yurt ceiling. The felt walls muting the wind outside. You think about the gifts. The weight they carried. The warmth they promised. Gold impresses. Wool connects. And connection. Out here is everything. The wind is louder today. Not just gusty, but opinionated. It whistles between yurts like it's delivering news from the mountains. Sleeping under your cloak with a chill so sharp you flinch. Even the horses are grumpy. Tails swishing, ears flat. You bury your chin deeper into your scarf, a tightly woven strip of felt that, while not exactly glamorous, has kept your nose from freezing off more than once. If you hadn't grasped it before, you grasp it now. Mongol wool wasn't just tradition. It was survival. You trudge through camp, watching as everyone responds to the cold without so much as a complaint. Children are bundled in thick, belted robes that hang like miniature tents. One toddler waddles around in boots so stuffed with wool it barely bends his knees. Elders sit on low felt cushions near the stove, robes drawn tight, sipping tea. The whole world is wrapped in ship's legacy. And that wind? It's not a gentle breeze. It's the kind of wind that strips paint, tears banners, and slaps your soul out of alignment. Welcome to the Mongolian steppe. Historians still debate whether the Mongols would have achieved their massive conquests without their superior adaptation to harsh weather. Sure, they had strategy, speed, and brilliant command, but none of that matters if your army freezes before the first arrow is loosed. Wool clothing made that level of endurance possible. You reach a hilltop and peer out over the open land. The snow line is visible in the distance, crawling forward like a slow-moving beast. And there's no shelter for miles. No trees, no stone houses, just yurts, small domes of felt, standing defiant like toadstools in a hurricane. You duck into one for warmth, and the sudden silence is almost startling. The felt walls dull the roar of the wind into a gentle like breathing inside a blanket. This is the genius of your design. It's not just warm. It's quiet. Your ears stop ringing. Your spine anchors. A young girl is kneeling by the wall, stuffing more felt between the layers. She presses it down with a curved stick, creating tighter insulation. You sit nearby, and she hands you a wad of loose wool. Try, she says. So you do. It's harder than it looks. The wool resists, clings to your fingers, springs back when you try to flatten it. It's like taming a puff of stubborn fog. But after a few minutes, you get the hang of it. Push, press, hold. The felt panel thickens. You glance at the walls, double-layered felt, patched over time with different shades. Each patch tells a story: winter storms, goat dolls, hand-sewn reapers by someone who knew what they were doing. Every time the wind howls, these walls hold steady. They remember. Quirky detail? In some Mongol traditions, families added an extra layer of felt to the north side of their yurt during winter, the direction from which the cruelest winds came. This wasn't just smart, it was symbolic. The north was seen as a force to be respected. Even feared. You didn't fight it. You prepared. Your host enters the yurt, face red from the cold but grinning. He tosses his outer cloak to the floor, revealing another wool robe underneath. It's as if Mongol fashion was built on the principle of onioning, layer upon layer, each with a specific purpose. Cloak, robe, sash, underrobe, trousers, felted boots, wool-wrapped gaiters, hat. The average warrior was essentially a walking bundle of heat retention science. And it wasn't just clothes. The entire ecosystem of daily life was wool-centric. The stirrup covers on his saddle, felt. The cloth lining of his boucasse, wool. The padding on the yurt's door flap, felt. Stitched with red thread in a lightning pattern to scare away the wind. It tells you with a wink. Even meals took wool into account. Food was wrapped in felt to stay warm. Pots were placed on thick felt pads to avoid burning the floor. And if someone was sick, they were bundled head to toe in hot felt wraps soaked in herbal steam. Mongol medicine wasn't big on pills, but it was big on blankets. Historians noted that during the expansion of the Mongol Empire, military logistics included rolls of felt loaded onto carts, not just for clothing, but for tents, repairs, bedding, and impromptu armor. Armies moved faster when they could bring their insulation with them. And you're slowly becoming one with your wool. Your cloak is heavier than when you arrived. As if it's absorbing the landscape. It smells like fire, wind, and something vaguely buttery. You're not asking questions. As the day wears on, the storm picks up. Snow dances across the sky in sideways gusts. You hunker down inside the yurt, sipping tea from a shallow bowl. Your hands buried in felt mittens that double as oven gloves. Outside, you hear nothing but the occasional crack of the yurt's frame adjusting to the pressure. Inside, it's warm, still, human. You sleep on a thick felt mat. Beneath 3 layers of wool. Your breath fogging the air for only a second before being swallowed by the fabric. You're aware, as you drift off, that this is what survival looks like, not shiny, not flashy, just warm, silent, enduring. Gold might dazzle, but wool endures the wind. You dream of sheep, not the kind you count to fall asleep, but shaggy, stomping, side-eye giving sheep that seem mildly disappointed in your riding skills. One of them might be your cloak in a past life. You can't be sure. Morning breaks softly. The wind is calm, the air dry, and outside, a circle of elders is sitting by a fire that smokes like it's telling secrets. They're not talking much, just sitting, thinking. One of them has a bundle in his lap, thick, soft, and beautifully decorated with red and gold embroidery. You edge closer, and your host whispers, "It's a protective felt, for the spirits." You've heard murmurs about this for days. But now, you're finally about to witness it firsthand, the quiet spiritual world of Mongol wool. Beyond its role in clothing, trade, and survival, wool had another dimension, one woven from belief, symbol, and story. The man with the felt bundle unwraps it gently. Inside is a small, intricately knotted charm made from twisted strands of black and white wool. He holds it up, mutters a few words under his breath, and passes it clockwise around the circle. Each person touches it, some solemn, others smiling. It's hard to tell if this is ritual, memory, or both. Historians still argue about the scope of wool's role in Mongol spirituality. Some sources describe shamanic practices involving felt cloaks, wool cords, or sacred rocks used during ceremonies. Others noted that even the layout of a yurt, circular, enclosed, womb-like, mirrored cosmological beliefs, with felt as the barrier between the human world and the spirit realm. And that charm? It's called a tuft, made from specific tufts of wool. It might be hung near the door, tied to a horse's mane, or stitched into a child's clothing. Its colors matter. Its knots matter. It's not just decoration, it's dialogue. You watch as one elder places the charm beside the fire. Then adds a pinch of dried hairs. The smoke curls upward like a question mark. No one speaks for a while. You don't either. Quirky fact, some Mongol families made offerings of wood tufts to sacred trees or mountain shrines. The tufts were tied to branches or placed in stone cairns. Each a small plea for protection, good health, safe travel. The act itself was simple, but potent. You give a piece of the flock to ask the world to be kind. You're handed a small strip of felt with a red bead sewn into the center. For your dreams, someone says. You nod, even though you don't know exactly what it means. That seems to be part of the point. Inside the yurt later, you help unroll a ceremonial rug. It's thicker than usual, dyed in natural shades of ochre and indigo. Along the edges are embroidered animal shapes, deer, eagle, sheep, horse, symbols of strength, vision, endurance, and loyalty. In the center, a spiral. Your host traces it with a calloused finger. This is the sky road, where spirits walk. The rug, he explains, is used during blessings, birth, and important decisions. New couples stand on it during weddings. Shamans sit on it when seeking visions. When someone dies, it may be burnt. It's smoke carrying the soul skyward. And it's always felt, not cotton, not silk, felt. Why? Because wool, like the people who wear it, bends but doesn't break. It endures fire. It keeps secrets. It remembers. You step outside to stretch your legs and find a woman braiding wool into a thick cord. She says it's for her husband's horse, meant to protect him on a long journey. She threads in a small shell, a sliver of bone, and a blue bead. Each thing has its own voice. She says. Together, they say something strong. The Mongol landscape, so empty at first glance, is full of symbols. The direction your door faces, the color of your sash, the pattern stitched into your sleeping mat. Felt, as it turns out, is language. Historians often overlook this soft infrastructure of belief. They focus on battles, empires, conquests, but what's stitched into a cloak can say as much as what's carved into a stone. You return to your yurt at night and tie the red bead charm above your sleeping space. You're not sure if it works, but you sleep deeper. No sheep dreams this time. Just quiet, and the soft breath of wool wrapped walls holding back the world. Gold makes monuments. Wool carries meaning. And meanings, whispered in felt and flame, never fade. You're riding again, this time not across endless plains, but along a well-worn trail that weaves between low hills, edging close to what was once a major artery of trade. Your guide calls it the Great Track, a dusty ribbon of hoof-beaten earth that carried messages, goods, and armies across half the known world. You've heard the name before, the Silk Road. But here, right now, no one mentions silk, not yet. Here, what matters is wool, and not just for clothing. Wool kept the entire system moving. Imagine this, you're a messenger galloping across thousands of kilometers. The winds are howling, the temperature drops 30 degrees overnight, and the last tree you saw was 3 days ago. What keeps you alive? Not silk shirts, not gold coins, wool saddle pads, wool felt tents, wool wrapped food satchels, and a cloak heavy enough to double as both sleeping bag and, on occasion, burial shroud. Historians still argue over how much of the Silk Road was actually traveled by Mongol traders themselves versus allied or conquered intermediaries. But everyone agrees that once the Mongol Empire unified vast stretches of Asia and Eastern Europe, it became a highway, and wool was the reliable fuel for every stop along the way. You stop at a rest station, well, what's left of it? Just a circle of stones now, a few timbers, and the ghost of a fire pit. But your guide tells you this was once a jam, part of the imperial postal relay system. Riders could switch horses, warm up, and get a bite to eat before dashing off again into the horizon. And every jam was stocked with wool. Quirky fact, these stations often kept emergency supplies of felted wool cloaks and boots for freezing travelers. Sometimes, even the walls were made from thick felt panels that could be packed up and moved to a new site when the wind patterns shifted. One traveler even described a tent station so thickly linked that the wind couldn't whistle its lies through the seams. You mount up and continue riding. Your horse's saddle is padded with 3 layers, a leather seat, a wool stuffed liner, and beneath that, a thick felt pad to distribute weight and protect the horse's back. You lean forward and pat the beast's neck in thanks. Its ears flick once in modest acknowledgement. As you move, you pass another caravan headed in the opposite direction. A mix of horses and camels, each draped in a curious combination of gear, some from Persia, some from Central Asia, some unmistakably Mongol. On nearly all of them, wool plays a starring role. Cargo is wrapped in felt. Saddle blankets are stitched with clan symbols. Even the bells tied to a camel's harness are muted with wool tufts to soften the hangle. They nod to you in passing. No one stops. That's the nature of the route. Keep moving. Keep the wool tight, don't waste sunlight. And the goods? Not just silk. You see spices, blocks of salt, dried fruit, bolts of cloth, and some were buried in a leather bundle, yes. A stack of wool cloaks ready to be traded. In cities like Samarkand or Karakorum, high-quality Mongol wool was a sought-after commodity. Not flashy, not rare, but reliable, and always needed. You break for lunch beneath a lone tree, gnarled and defiant. Your host unwraps a pouch, felt, of course, containing dried cheese, hardened milk cores, and 2 boiled eggs that are still warm thanks to their wool nest. You share it quietly, and sip warm tea from a little felt cup that's seen better days. You wonder, not for the first time, how much history depends not on great battles or palace intrigue, but on whether someone packed enough insulation. By afternoon, the sun bites less harshly, and the road flattens. Your guide points to a rocky outcrop in the distance, once a border checkpoint. Traders had to declare their goods, pay a small toll, and, more often than not, offer a gift. One of the most common? High-grade felt. Not silk, not gold, felt. Why? Because you could line a floor with it. Wrap a baby. Pad a box of fragile glassware. Felt was the ultimate packaging material. Worn and useful and durable. The kind of thing that made a merchant's journey bearable. And the customs officer? He'd want something he could actually use. You're handed a rolled-up piece to examine. It's been dyed blue with indigo. And the edges are stitched with a repeating triangle motif. It's soft but strong, still faintly smelling of hairs. You roll it back up with care. The past doesn't always whisper in marble. Sometimes it smells like lanolin and travel dust. As the sun dips, your camp is set beside a narrow stream. Horses are unsaddled. Fire is lit. Your woolen bedroll is unrolled, 2 felt layers. A patched wool mat, and your familiar itchy cloak. You settle in. Your body sore but content. The Silk Road was the highway. But wool was the tires, the tent, the bedding, the coat, the curtain, the seat cushion, and, more often than not, the pillow. Gold may have lit the destination. But wool carried you there. Night in the steppe is no joke. The kind of cold that sneaks up through the ground and into your bones like it's looking for secrets. You're wrapped in everything you own, 2 cloaks, a hat with your flaps, and at least 1 layer that might have previously belonged to a ship with anger issues. And yet, you're still freezing. Your host, by contrast, is sleeping peacefully beside the fire, head resting on a rolled-up felt saddle pad, face half hidden behind a beard that looks like it was knitted from scratch. You envy that beard. You also envy his apparent immunity to the elements. But then you remember, this is his land, his wool, his world, and maybe, just maybe, his ancestors include someone very famous who felt exactly the same wind against their face. Genghis Khan. Historians still argue whether the great Khan himself had any particular obsession with wool. We don't have surviving diary entries about his favorite blanket. But what we don't know is this: the Mongol army functioned on wool. Their supply chains, their winter survival, even their horses' comfort, wool was the constant. You hear stories around the fire about how Genghis traveled with multiple wool cloaks, some for himself, others as gifts or war loot. One version says his primary cloak was never washed, only smoked over fire and aired in mountain wind. That's certainly one way to deal with laundry. Another tale, probably apocryphal, but still fun, claims that during a campaign through frigid highlands, the Khan ordered all his soldiers to double-layer their cloaks and use saddle blankets as body wraps at night. They survived. The enemy, in shiny metal armor, frostbite. Sometimes you don't need gold-plated strategy. You just need a good blanket. You sit now with your own cloak pulled tight, staring into the fire, and wonder what he smelled like. Sweat, firewood, destiny. Quirky fact. According to one 14th century chronicler, when Genghis Khan received emissaries, he would sometimes wear a plain wool robe, nothing ornate. Not to appear humble, necessarily, but to signal that he was grounded. Practical, a man of the steppe. Gold robes were for other empires. Theirs fell, his didn't. Point made. There's even a legend that Genghis once rejected an elaborately embroidered silk robe offered by a wealthy Persian merchant and instead asked for good wool. Not fancy wool, not dyed, just good, durable, soft enough for sleeping, strong enough for battle. The merchant, allegedly insulted, later changed careers. You're pulled from your thoughts when your host tosses a fresh log onto the fire. Sparks jump, and nods to you, then unrolls a heavy wool cloak and drapes it over your legs without a word. Instantly, you're warmer. It's like being hugged by an elephant-sized grandmother. The cloak, thick felt, stitched in a white diamond pattern. Probably older than some countries. It smells of smoke and long meals. But under its weight, the cold doesn't bite so hard. You almost hear it give up. You lean back and close your eyes. And for a brief moment, you imagine what it must have been like, Khan or no Khan, to ride 4 days. Sleep on frozen dirt, and trust your cloak to hold your soul inside your skin. Mongol warriors carried few things: a bow, a knife, some dried meat, and their cloak. That cloak might serve as a saddle blanket, tent wall, tourniquet, shield, pillow, baby sling, rain cover, or burial shroud. It was less an accessory and more an extension of the self. And unlike gold, which just sits there looking as a mug, wool works. You think back on the cities the Mongols swept through: Samarkand, Kiev, Baghdad, where marble palaces sparkled and silks spilled from market stalls. They left with riches, yes, but also with bags full of fleece. Horses draped in felt, saddlebags lined in wool, not because they lacked finer things, but because they knew what would last the ride home. You opened your eyes. The stars overhead are bright enough to make the fire feel small. The yurt silhouettes are quiet now. Their felt walls muting laughter and breath alike. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then curls into a ball against a sleeping sheep. You draw the cloak higher over your shoulders. The same kind of cloak Hennis might have worn. Or at least, the kind his soldiers soar by. The kind that outlives battles. That keeps babies alive in winter. That wraps bones. Centuries later, when time finally wins. Gold is for kings. Wool is for conquerors. Morning comes slow and golden. The kind of light that doesn't so much shine as stretch, touching every dew-tipped blade of grass like it's apologizing for the night. You stretch, too, cracking joints that apparently ahead 3 decades overnight. Your cloak is stiff with frost on the outside but warm on the inside. Like a sourdough loaf of survival. Today, your host is counting sheep. Literally, they're preparing a tax inventory. Which, yes, sounds thrilling. But stay with it, it's weirder than you think. Mongol taxation wasn't done with ink-stained ledgers and quill pens. It was done with fleece. Wool, you see, wasn't just currency or clothing. It was data. It told officials how many sheep you had, how many households shared a herd, and whether a family owed tribute, taxes, or thanks. It was part of a living, breathing spreadsheet made of grass, hooves, and very opinionated animals. You sit beside the herder scribe, who doubles as the camp's best felt maker, and watch as unrolls a length of wool string tied at intervals. This is the tally rope, a physical record of oath contributions. A knot might mean one sheep. A colored bead might signify a specific family. A red thread, maybe you're overdue. Historians still debate how standardized these wool-based records were. Some claim they were local customs, improvised and passed down orally. Others believe there were semi-official codes used across the empire, especially under the Yasa, the legal code attributed to Genghis Khan himself. What's certain is that wool showed up in the paperwork, if you can call bundles and ropes paperwork. And it went both ways. When the empire distributed resources, salt, grain, weaponry, they often did it based on livestock records. Your ability to pay in fleece or wool goods could determine whether your family got a new bowstring, or had to make one out of braided goat hair again. Quirky fact, some records were literally written on wool. Not in ink, but in knot patterns, felt layers, or even die codes. One rare example describes a tax messenger carrying a talking rock, a rolled up felt strip marked with symbols that conveyed the emperor's orders. Less parchment, more patchwork telegram. You follow your host to the main yurt, where a low platform is covered in trade goods, bundles of fleece, a stack of cloaks, several boots in varying sizes. These aren't for wear. Tier assessment samples. The officials, arriving any day now, will touch, inspect, and sniff these items to determine a value. A sniff, yes, really. A cloak that smells of smoke, sweat, and wind, that's a used item, potentially worn during travel, high value. A boot that's too stiff? Might be poorly tanned. A rug with uneven felting? Taxable, but at a discount. Mongol inspectors were textile sommeliers. Meanwhile, another family is preparing their contribution, a newly felted saddle pad stitched with the family's knot symbol. They're wrapping it in clean cloth and placing it in a woven wool bag tied with a red cord. The care is obvious. This isn't just tribute, it's a statement. We made this. We matter. You sit quietly, absorbing it all. The way wool absorbs everything: time, scent, story. A baby cries nearby and is immediately swaddled in a rolled felt wrap so dense it could double as a crash mat. It settles. You do, too. Later in the day, a caravan arrives, several riders bearing the imperial seal, a carved tag of bone and silver. They dismount, stretch, and are immediately handed bowls of salted milk tea and a felt square to sit on. There's no ceremony, no shouting, just the unrolling of bundles, the touching of fabrics, and quiet nods. And as you watch, something strange happens. You begin to see the whole empire not as a map, but as a web, a great, interconnected tapestry of clans and courts and cloaks, stitched not with ink or blood, but with wool. You imagine invisible threads stretching across valleys, over rivers, through yurts, wool taxes, wool tribute, wool debts, wool gifts, a bureaucracy built not on paper, but on touch. Historians often describe the Mongol administrative system as surprisingly modern. But maybe it was just tactile. Maybe it worked because people could hold their obligations, weigh them, wrap them around their shoulders, or sleep beneath them. Gold made for tidy ledgers. Wool told a story. You help repack the bundles. The tax inspectors nod once. Satisfied. They leave just as quietly as they came. The wind returns. The yurts settle back into their breath. The ship seemed blissfully unaware you've just participated in fiscal history. You took your cloak close as you returned to your yurt. Fingers tracing the stitched pattern along its hem. You wonder, did someone else use this for tax? Did it represent a family's contribution? Their promise to the empire? Their piece of the weave? You'll never know for sure. But you remember this, in a world ruled by steppe storms and shifting loyalties. Wool was steady. Not gold. Wool. By now, the steppe feels like an old friend, loud, rude, unpredictable, but always honest. You've learned how to sit a horse without wincing. How to brew tea that tastes like soup. And how to sleep under wool thick enough to muffle your heartbeat. The sky stretches endlessly above you. And in the wind, you can almost hear history humming. Today is your last full day here. And your host decides it's time to show you the family storage yurt. Now, storage might conjure images of dusty shelves and forgotten shoes. But this yurt is different. It's neat, intentional. Everything here tells a story. Wool, naturally, is everywhere. Rugs are rolled tight and stacked by color. Cloaks hang from leather loops like patient ghosts. A series of padded saddle blankets is arranged by use, travel, ceremony, winter wear. In one corner, a trunk is opened to reveal old felt boots. Their soles worn paper thin. Their tops lovingly patched. Each one has a name etched inside in faded thread. These were my father's. Your host says. I wore them to war. Then to weddings. Then to bed. You smile. Of course I did. Among the most curious items is a stack of small woolen pouches. Each tied with red string and sealed with beeswax. Your host hands you one carefully. Open later. They say. Inside is not gold. Better. Historians still argue what the Mongols treasured most. Their conquests yielded fortunes, chests of gold, bales of silk, crates of spices, but in every Mongol stronghold, you'll find caches of practical things. Saddles, bowstrings, and always, felt. The truly valuable things were the ones that kept you warm, dry, alive. You exit the storage yurt and wander a bit. Taking in the village. Children laugh as they chase each other with wool pom-poms. An elder rolls out a felt panel to mend. A woman shakes a rug clean with practiced grace. And then you see it, a tiny yurt. Barely waist high. A child's playhouse. Built entirely of wool. You crouch beside it, marveling at the perfect mimicry, a miniature roof crown. A working flap door. Even tiny felt rugs inside. Quirky detail? Some Mongol children learned the rhythms of life, housework, storytelling, even diplomacy, through these little felt yurts. A game, yes, but also training, living history, passed not by books, but by hands. You sit with the children. Help sew a scrap of red wool into a pretend saddle. They don't speak your language. But it doesn't matter. They know what you're doing. This word isn't taught. It's absorbed. In every thread. As evening comes. A small celebration begins. A farewell. Of sorts. Your host has invited neighboring families. They're singing. Dancing. The clapping of boots on hard-packed earth. You're handed a bowl of broth and a heavy cloak to sit on. Wool again, always wool. In the center of it all, a rug is unrolled. It's massive, faded in places, but dazzling. The designs ripple outward, mountains, horses, sun spirals. Around it, people take their places. This is the family's memory rug. Not just for warmth or decoration, but for marking moments. Babies have taken first steps on it. Couples have knelt here to marry. The dead have been honored atop its soft embrace. Your host gestures for you to sit at its edge. This is where we keep what matters. They say, voice low. And in that moment, you understand something that's eluded empires and emperors alike. The Mongols didn't just conquer. They remembered. They stitched meaning into fiber. They wove their stories into the things that traveled with them. Gold gets locked in bowls. Wool gets passed down. You pull your own cloak tight. The one you were given on your first night. It smells like fire now. Like broth. Like everything you've learned. You're not ready to leave it behind. And then you remember the pouch. You open it slowly. Inside is a tiny felt charm, 2 twisted strands, one gray, one brown, bound together with red thread. Sewn into the top is a blue bead and a few stray sheep hairs. No note. No explanation. But you don't need one. You've been wrapped in meaning since you arrived. Wind down, final 300 words. The fire burns low now. The laughter thinning into murmurs. The air thick with sleep and ember smoke. Around you, cloaks become blankets, boots become pillows, and the stars overhead blur as your eyes begin to close. Outside, the wind picks up, but it no longer feels sharp. It sings instead, a soft, constant lullaby over the hills, through the grass, around the yurts, and inside your heavy felt cloak. You're untouched, wrapped, carried. You think of the ship that gave the wool, the hands that pressed it, the stories sewn into every seam. This wasn't fabric, it was a world. A whisper from generations past that still has something to say. You rest your head on a folded cloak, heavy with sleep and history. The charm in your hand is warm. The red thread soft between your fingers. It means something, even if you'll never fully know what. Out here, not everything is meant to be understood. Some things are only meant to be felt. So let your thoughts drift like dust across the plain. Let the fire fade to coals. Let the night carry you. And remember, gold shines in bowls. But wool remembers your shape. You wake slowly, warm, blanketed, and faintly aware that your cheek has left a small puddle of drool on your borrowed cloak. It's fine. The felt doesn't judge. The camp is stirring again. Not in a rush. Not in a panic, just moving with the unhurried certainty of people who have lived here before you and will likely live the same way long after you're gone. Somewhere, a kettle whistles over a quiet fire. Someone coughs. A sheep sneezes. You stretch beneath your wool. The familiar weight oddly reassuring now. It's more than fabric. It's become your companion, like a sleepy, loyal dog that follows you wherever you go. Shedding just enough to mark territory but not enough to complain about. Your host meets you outside. A bowl of warm tea in one hand and a folded piece of parchment in the other. We're moving today, they say. New pasture. Time to load the wool. And there it is, another layer of the Mongol world revealed. Mobility. This wasn't a culture of fixed homes and nailed down furniture. The Mongols moved, seasonally, strategically, spiritually, and when they moved, they didn't abandon anything. They took their world with them, wrapped, rolled, and staked in felt. You help pack. Rocks are folded into thirds. Then strapped with woolen cords. Your walls, curved wooden lattices, are staked neatly, with felt coverings rolled around them like giant cinnamon rolls of domesticity. Saddle blankets are shaken out and layered onto the horses. Everything is done with precision but not anxiety. This isn't a chore, it's just what life does here. Historians still marvel at how efficiently the Mongols relocated. A small family could break down their entire home, pack it, and be on the move within a few hours. By sunset, the yurt would be standing again, felts red-draped, fire relit, tea boiling. Try that with a two-bedroom apartment and a moving truck. Quirky detail? Some Mongol families marked their felt bundles with unique tassels, knotted wool cords dyed with specific plant-based pigments. These functioned like modern luggage tags. Except fluffier and with a better backstory. As the caravan begins to move, you ride near the middle. Your saddle is, of course, felt padded. Your travel bag is felt wrapped. The bumpy trail is softened only by your faith in wool's ability to keep your spine from turning into gravel. You pass markers, small stone heaps called obo, piled high over generations. Many are adorned with woolen ribbons, scraps of felt, or tufts of fleece tied by travelers seeking protection for the journey. You're handed a strip of red felt by your host. No instructions, just a knowing nod. You tie it to a branch stuck into the stones and whisper something you won't remember later. It doesn't matter. The felt hears you. The group halts by a stream for midday rest. Horses graze. The younger riders unpack lunch, flatbread, dried cords, and a smoked sausage wrapped in oiled wool paper. You've stopped asking questions about packaging. Wool is the answer. You nap briefly on a saddle blanket. The of nearby conversation lulling you. When you wake, someone has covered you with a light felt shawl and tucked it under your feet. No one takes credit. That's just what you do. By evening, the new camp is chosen, a gentle rise near a stand of wind-bent trees. The yurts begin rising like mushrooms after rain. Curved bones fitted together. Woolen skins unfold over the frame like sails catching a wind of memory. You help drape a roof panel, arms straining under its weight. It smells like sun, ash, and somewhere deep in the layers, milk. Your hands are scratched. Your face is flushed. But as the final roof flap is tied down and the door is hung, you feel it. Home. Not in the ownership sense. In the wrapped in history sense. Like you've stepped into something older than stone. Gold is heavy. Wool moves with you. Your new camp feels like the old one, but softer. The grass here is lusher. The wind slightly less sarcastic. And the air carries that rich, earthy smell of sheep who've had a good day. You're learning that in the Mongol world, moving doesn't feel like starting over. It feels like unfolding a familiar page in a well-loved book. The yurts are up, fires are lit, the animals have settled into their evening grazing. And someone is singing near the cooking area, a slow, winding tune that sounds like it's older than the mountains. You sit on a rolled felt cushion, sipping tea, and let your eyes wander to the pack animals resting nearby. Today, you're learning about wool's final frontier, preservation. Not just preserving yourself with warm and wind-blocking cloaks, but preserving food, tools, weapons, and even stories inside wool itself. Because in a world that moves constantly, everything you carry must be protected, not in gold, not in glass, but in wool. Your host opens a storage sack. Inside are balls of cheese, hard enough to double as marbles. Tear wrapped tightly in felt and tied with a single cord. Smiles as a hands you one. Try to eat it, says. But don't break a tooth. You take a polite nibble. It's assertive, but preserved. Historians have noted that Mongols used wool not just as clothing or padding, but as insulation for food storage. Bags were lined with felt to keep dairy from freezing or overheating. Some tribes even layered dried meat between strips of pressed wool, creating something akin to a medieval lunchbox, wool on the outside, nutrients on the inside, flavor somewhere in between. Quirky fact: in extremely cold seasons, felt was used to wrap fermented milk pots, keeping the bacteria alive and the contents fermenting slowly, even when everything else had frozen solid. Fermentation under wool. You won't see that on a cooking show. Your host shows you an older bag, thick with smoke and thyme. Inside is a flint kit, a fire starter, a small knife, and a bundle of dried grass. Each piece is wrapped separately in wool felt. Why? Because felt protects from moisture, dulls sharp edges, and muffles sound. If you dropped this bag in the dark, it wouldn't clink. It would thud, like a quiet agreement between nomad and night. As the sun sets, another elder brings out something even more precious, a scroll wrapped in felt. Not paper, but birch bark, etched with symbols. The felt covering is older than the writing, patched, restitched, repaired over decades. This isn't a book, it's a memory container, a portable library with sheep-sourced covers. You're told this scroll details lineage, a family history that predates borders. It's shown to the youngest child in the circle, who listens with wide eyes. Then it's wrapped again and returned to its place, tied with blue string. The felt is kissed before it's stored. You don't ask why. You understand now. Wool remembers. Even musical instruments, flutes, horsehead fiddles, small drums, are swaddled in felt when not in use. You help unwrap one, a hand drum with a taut leather face and a hollow wooden frame. The felt inside isn't for protection. It's for sound. It dampens the rattle, deepens the tone. Felt isn't just silence, it's resonance. And then there are the keepsakes. Tucked inside the roof of the yurt, hanging like dried hairs, are tiny felt bundles tied with red and white cords. Spirits, your host whispers. Or memories. Depends who you ask. Each one holds something. A pebble, a curl of hair, a feather, a tooth. Tear not displayed, tear kept close. Felt becomes their shell, soft armor for things too important to leave bare. Historians often overlook this aspect of wool, not just its use, but its trustworthiness. You can't always explain why something needs protecting, but you know it does. And felt says, I'll keep it safe. That night, as the stars reappear and the wind returns with a yawn, you sit beside the fire with your host and quietly wrap your own bundle. A scrap of felt, a bead, one of your own hairs, a pebble from the riverbank. You don't label it, you don't have to. Tomorrow, you'll tuck it somewhere in the yurt wall, between layers of felt already dense with breath and smoke and whispered names. Not because it's valuable, but because it matters. You wake up warm, which should be impossible. Outside, the frost has turned every blade of grass into a tiny spear of ice. And your breath hangs in the air like it's afraid to fall. But inside the yurt, silent, soft, safe. The felt walls have held back the cold again. You roll over slowly, still swaddled in your cloak, and feel something lumpy beneath your shoulder. It's the charm you made yesterday, now flattened slightly but no worse for wear. You smile and tuck it into your sash. Today is your last full day on the steppe. Your host, perhaps sensing this, decides it's time to show you something sacred. Not gold, not treasure, something quieter. It begins with a ride at dawn. The sun just breaking the edge of the earth, casting long shadows that seem to whisper across the plain. You ride in silence, past grazing herds and wind-scoured rocks, until you reach a hill unlike the others. At its base, a cluster of stones. At the top, something unexpected, a yurt. But this one is different. Smaller, simpler, no smoke curling from its roof. No tethered horses nearby, and yet, it radiates importance. This is for the ancestors. Your host says. Only felt touches the inside. You approach slowly, unsure if you're allowed. The door is closed but not sealed. The air around it feels thick with time. When you step inside, your boots land on a floor entirely covered in layers of hand-stitched felt, each one decorated with symbols, patterns, stories. You take it in, walls draped with ceremonial panels. The scent of hairs, old wool, and something like pine. In the center, a low platform covered with a thick rug. A bowl of milk sits atop it, next to a piece of bread wrapped in clean white felt. This is how we remember them. Your host whispers, with warmth, not with stone. You sit in the silence. And it's not empty. It's full of memory, of movement, of thousands of nights like this one, stretching back through time. Historians still debate whether Mongols buried their dead in formal tombs or left them to the elements. But felt shows up again and again in these stories. Burial shrouds, memorial cloaks, even wool-stuffed saddles placed on empty horses for the journey to the next life. And it wasn't just for the body. Felt was burnt in ritual fires, its smoke rising as an offering. Tiny scraps were tied to trees or cast into rivers as a way of carrying the soul onward. In many traditions, the softest wool, untouched, unspun, was considered the most pure, most sacred. The sheep, after all, had touched the earth, had weathered storms, had given without speaking. Quirky fact, some Mongol clans believed that felted wool could carry messages to the sky. Knots tied in a certain pattern, burnt in specific kinds of fire, could speak to spirits better than words. You wonder what yours would say. Outside, the wind picks up. You feel it slip beneath the yurt flap and dance across your neck, but it doesn't chill you. Instead, it feels like a reminder. You wrap your cloak tighter and place your charm, the felt bundle you made, at the base of the central rock. Beside the others. No one speaks. You don't need to. Later, you ride back with your host. The horizon is blazing with sunset. The grass catching gold in a way actual gold never could. As you near the camp, your yurt, your temporary home, glows like an ember waiting to be banked. You dismount, drape your reins, breathe in the night. Inside, your host waits with one final gift, a roll of felt. Dyed with natural colors, patterned with simple knots. It's soft in your hands. You don't ask what it's for. You know, it's yours now, to carry, to pass on, to keep remembering. You press it to your chest. Close your eyes. Gold stays buried, but wool travels.